Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Food, Wine, and Whiskey in Your Own Backyard. I am Rob, your host, and today I am joined again by John Fodera. John, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. How about you?
Doing well.
Good to be back.
Well, I'm glad to have you. Down here in Texas, I'm a little jealous of the weather you guys are already getting up there. You know, you get that fall season. We get summer, and then we get winter. We kind of miss out on fall.
Yeah, no, I hear you. You know, this is a great time to live up here in the Northeast. But yeah, I mean, soon enough, it'll be snowing probably, or at least it'll be cold. We'll see. But yeah, we take these few months. They're great to be. You can be outside, you can be, inside. It's wonderful. AC goes off, windows come wide open, and it's good red wine weather.
Yeah, well, and I remember growing up in the Midwest, those kind of nights that you're talking about when you open those windows and just that fresh breeze, that clean air, sleeping at night. That was just a really solid night's sleep when you had that kind of environment. Yep. Yeah, miss those days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, John, we started I've started a new segment here for people to get to know my guests, kind of pull the curtain back a little bit and kind of know who they are as people. So I've come up with 5 questions that I now ask my guests that they get to answer.
Oh,
and
boy.
It kind of gives us a little bit more insight into who these people are. So you ready for the 5 questions?
All right, sure. Fire away.
Okay. Question number 1, favorite 80s movie?
Favorite 80s movie? Well, let me think. Gee, I got to make sure that it's in the 80s. I probably would say maybe Beverly Hills Cop.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah,
I think
that's 80s,
probably in the
for
80s.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right.
Breakfast Club, too. That was a big one when I was in school.
That was my wife's, Breakfast
Yeah.
Club, and I wonder how much that one will come up, because I think for us that grew up in the 80s, it hits a lot of when we went to high school, a lot of the points that we. Question number
Definitely.
2, favorite childhood food or meal or place that your family might have went out, once a month or whatever. What's that favorite childhood food kind of memory? And when I say childhood, it could be up to your, kind of teenage years, if you wanted to go that far.
I think definitely the meal that my mom would have made that I would have loved would be just, pan fried chicken cutlets.
Oh,
Definitely.
nice.
But,
Okay.
pizza and pasta were never a turn off.
Yeah. Did your mom make this? Was it kind of a special meal that it was only once in a while, or was this something you could look forward to, on a weekly or monthly kind of thing?
Chicken cutlets?
Chicken cutlets, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if she made them every week, but frequently enough. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And, chicken was dirt cheap back then.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely. Best decade for music, 70s, 80s, or 90s?
Boy, the bands that I still listen to, and whether I listen to them in the house or have them on my headset when I'm running, I gotta definitely say 70s.
Okay.
I kind of grew. Most of the guys I listened to were super active back then, and they still are.
Yeah.
Billy Joel, the
Abs-
Eagles, Fleetwood Mac, Boston.
Led
Even the
Zeppelin,
other
Steve
day I
Miller
was
Band.
listening.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was looking. I had Van Halen on the other day, and I'm like, man, look at that! Song came out in 1979. I was like, I was blown away that it was that early. So
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff uh, in there. And that's classic rock and roll is pretty much where I gravitate to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, here's the question number 4 that could be the most divisive question, to our listeners.
All right.
Chili, beans or no beans?
I don't. That's the one thing I usually do not make. My wife loves chili, and she makes it, and always with beans.
Thank you very much. Okay,
Yeah,
you're on the right side of
100%.
that argument. Yeah.
Yep,
And
yep.
final question, number 5. Your final nightcap pour. I mean, this is it for us, John. The lights are going out. What would be your final nightcap pour? The glass of whatever it would be that you'd like to drink for the last time.
If I'm having something that late, it would definitely be bourbon.
Well, when I say final nightcap, I'm talking about, like your final meal. You're getting ready to go to the other side. So this
Oh,
is your
the de-
last drink that you
the
get to
the
enjoy.
death row meal.
Yeah, I
Oh,
didn't
then
want to kind of get
definitely I
that dark
yeah,
about
yeah.
it, but
Okay, that's different. So then I go, yeah, I would definitely go with a probably a Brunello Reserva.
a
Yeah,
Brunello
I don't know,
Reserva.
could be any one of a couple different producers, but yeah, that's what I would go for.
Okay, cool. I kind of figured you'd go that way. Is there a specific one or two that you would be like tops on my list? And here's a question for you, kind of following up to that. Do you go with something you're familiar with that you absolutely enjoyed when you had it? Or do you go, this is a bottle I've been chasing, and if I could get my hand on it, that's what I would want?
I would probably say the former. I would probably go with something that I've had and that I know, even if I haven't had that vintage, that I know the vintage is a top one and I expect greatness, from the bottom. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it could be, it could be Castello Bonfils. That they make a fabulous Reserva. It comes from a single vineyard. Valdecava is wonderful. Il Pogiones is wonderful. The Paganelli vineyard. I tend to gravitate toward Brunello producers who make their Reserva from a single vineyard, as opposed to just saying, I'm going to take these are my best grapes and I'm going to pull them aside, and
Right.
because all they really have to do is, age the wine for an additional year. That then it can be a Reserva. I mean, it doesn't even have to be, better fruit, under the letter of the law. But when a producer says, I've got this vineyard and it's got better altitude, it's got better drainage, the vines are older, so it produces less fruit, but the fruit that it makes is way more complex. So I'm always going to strip that aside, and as long as the vintage is good enough, we're going to bottle that as a Reserva. And I mentioned Castello Bonfi. They first made their Brunello Reserva in 1985, from that single vineyard. And I don't know how many years it is from 1985 until 2020 off the top of my head, but the wine has only been made 15 times since then.
Wow. So that's 35
So
years, 15
yeah, so
times.
if that doesn't meet their, yep, if that doesn't meet their standard, they declassify it into the regular Brunello. So when that wine is produced, I know that it's going to be great. And interestingly enough, I just finished writing an article for the Somm Journal, and it's going to come out in the October, November issue, I think, of the Somm Journal, and it's a piece on Castello Bonfi. So a lot of it had to do with that vineyard and their new single vineyard Brunello, which is due to be released, I think, at the end of this month.
Wow.
So that should be an interesting thing to see.
Absolutely. John, you've come on a few times, and we always talk Italian wines. I mean, I call you an expert. Is that fair to say that you be classified as an expert?
I'll take that label.
Okay,
Yeah,
all
no
right.
worries.
I think it applies. Some people come on my show and go, I know a lot. Don't call me an expert, but I think you are, and I think your knowledge is extensive, and we always appreciate that you come on and share it with myself and the people who listen to the show. So thank you for that. The couple of times you've come on, we've talked about Tuscany, and we're kind of staying in that region for what we're going to talk about today. But before we dive into that, I'd like you to tell everybody who maybe hadn't listened to the previous episodes, and if you haven't, go back and check them out because they're really, really good. But tell everybody where they can find you and find some of your information and kind of get behind what you're doing as far as your blog and things like that.
Yep, sure. So, Italian wine journalist. My website is just my name. It's www.johnfodera.com under the branding of Tuscan Vines. But you'll find articles there about all areas of Italy. All the major wine regions are covered to some degree, but there's a heavy focus on Tuscany because that was my original passion. And then on top of that, I cook a lot, so there's a couple hundred easily read and illustrated recipes on there too that my readers really love, and they get great feedback. So it's worth checking out for that too.
Yeah, the
One
recipes.
of these days I should probably put a cookbook together, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah, that'd be a great idea, but from you because I think your recipes are fantastic. We've cooked several of them, and typically when we cook them, we have guests over, and they've been big hits. So yeah, your food is awesome. I do want to say though, talking about your wine blog and your website, um, you're not the typical wine critic that just lines up 15 bottles, takes a sip, and then kind of gives it a grade and moves on. I mean, tell people how you
Right.
evaluate a wine, because I think it makes a big difference when people are looking for a resource to really kind of understand what this wine's about. You kind of do a really good job of that.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, that's one of the reasons I started Tuscan Vines in the first place was because I was tired of, looking at a, 9 or 10 word description of a wine with, with a with a number plastered after it. I mean, that's an easy way, for these, mainstream critics to taste, 200 wines in 2 days, to get it out in a magazine, but it doesn't really do the consumer, much good. Especially as we'll talk about, with Vino Nobile, the wines can be very different. And just looking at a score, it doesn't really tell you much unless you're the kind of person who just, wants to, chase after high scores and not really know what you're doing. But one of my passions was, like I said, the wine, the food, the Italian culture, and Italian wines or most old world wines, whether it's French or Spanish too, they're meant to be drunk, with your family, with friends, around the table, and with food. So the wines have to pair well that way. So simply lining up, 10 or 20 wines, tasting a sip, spitting it out, and writing down a few things. I mean, that's not how wine is enjoyed. So I always taste, the wines that I'm writing about, with food, without food, but the bulk of it is always at the dinner table. And, it's usually after, could be a 30-minute or a 90-minute, decant to allow the wine to express itself. And then I really get into, the style of the wine, a little bit about the producer for those who want to take a deeper dive. They can read the article or they can skip right down to the wine review itself. But my wine reviews are usually, one or two paragraphs, not, 8 or 10 words.
Yeah.
And I will put a score number there for people who like that. It's a barometer for a lot of people, but I would hope, when I'm writing about something that they read about the wine and they try to, get a sense of the style of the wine and maybe start to learn what they like, because then they can go and they can buy, similar wines without worrying about scores.
Yeah, and scores to me, I mean, I've gotten a little. If somebody looks at the 100-point scale, and you kind of dive into what each grade is, 80s, 90s, whatever is supposed to mean. Used to be that mid to upper 80s was a really good wine, and in today's
Right.
world, everybody, if it's not 90 plus, people think it's not a good wine anymore. In my opinion, there's some critics out there that everything's 90 plus, and I just, for
Right.
me, it makes me go, okay, it creates a trust issue. I'd say it that way. And what am I
Right.
really getting
There's
in the
a
bottle?
there's an old phrase, I think, I don't remember who said it, and it was a retailer who told me about it, and I'm not going to get it quite right, but it was something along the lines like, if a wine scores, an 89, I can't sell it, and if it scores a 92, I can't buy it. Because it's like it's so severely allocated that you
Yeah,
can't get it.
yeah.
And it's a double-edged sword. But yeah, and that's the thing. I love finding wines that are, the best thing I can do for my readers, right, is to give them a wine that's $15 and 95 points or something like that. That's something that they can go out and say, wow, this is great. I can get a case of it, and it's under the radar. They're in on it before a lot of people know all about it. So yeah, I mean, I think that's important. It's good to find those wines.
Well, you brought up something that you mentioned as you're kind of evaluating a wine. You talked about decanting that wine, maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Do you have some general rule? Maybe I'm putting you on the spot here, John. You can tell me if I am, but some general rule of how long to decant a wine And I know that's a lot to that answer, but is it
Yeah.
by age? Is it by type of grape or where it comes from that you found that, wines from this region really need to be decanted? Wines in this classification really are pop it and drink it kind of wines.
Right. No, I mean, a lot of it just comes from experience and I don't mean, long drinking experience, but familiarity with that very wine. So, and it could be a wine type, your Cabernet, your Brunello, whatever it may be. Yeah, I always kind of err on the side of caution where, I usually open a bottle, like if we're going to eat, I don't know, I'll open the bottle like an hour before dinner, let's say, and I'll pop the cork and I'll taste a little, I'll put a little bit in a glass, swirl it around, give it a smell, taste it, see where it's at. And at that point, I'll say, okay, I want to dump this thing out. I'll dump it into the decanter, or I won't. I'll just leave it there with the cork out of it. But as if you're building, if you've got a cellar when you've purchased, two, three, four bottles of the same wine or maybe more, you kind of learn, and then if you like that wine from that producer and you buy it in the next vintage, you get an understanding of their style and their track record, and depending on how young the wine is, it might need some air, and then it kind of goes like inverse in my mind, right? So let's just talk about Barolo, for instance. If you have a young Barolo, I would probably, decant it for a little bit of time, maybe 30 minutes, an hour, just to give it a little air and see what's going on. And by young, I mean, the current vintage, 16, 17, whatever you may have. As those wines get a little older, let's say they're 10 years old, then I would take a 10-year-old Barolo and I would dump it straight into the decanter, for an hour. Give it a good hour to come out of that, slumber where it's kind of been, contained for so long. Let it start to get some aromas going. But then if you've got a 20-year-old wine, sometimes they get a little more delicate. So if you dump them into a decanter for that long, they kind of start to get a little funky. So those I might decant, maybe 30 minutes or even less before we're going to eat. And the only reason I would decant that is to get rid of the sediment that's probably definitely going to be present in the wine. And then I just like to let it, if you have a big enough wine glass, I just like to play with it and let it, open up, let it evolve in the glass while you're eating, sometimes sometimes you get burned that way. I've done that where I've had, down to the last, glass out of the bottle. And I'm like, wow, this is the best glass of the whole bottle. I should have opened it sooner. Sometimes you get beat, but a lot of times you don't.
Well,
so
and you just
trial
brought
and
up
error.
something else. I think a lot of people just go to the store, maybe getting into wine or haven't been into it that long to really, and I think you're right, it's kind of going through and learning those things, but how important the glass is for a glass of wine to help that expression kind of show and taste the way it's supposed to. Because I can remember my wife and I going to a restaurant. We were out in California on a little vacation, and there was a place that we heard about for dinner, an Italian place, and they said you could bring your own bottle of wine. And it was a nice Italian place. And so I was like, let's go pick up a really nice bottle of wine and go enjoy a dinner at this place. And we did. But the wine glasses we got were, probably 2.5, 3 inches circumference, maybe 2.5, 3 inches deep. And you got nothing on this, $150 bottle of wine that we took. We just did not enjoy it at all. It just took everything out of it. So how important is understanding, especially specifically to Italian wines, kind of having the right glassware to make sure that you're also getting out of that wine what you want?
Yeah, no, you're right. And the same thing has happened to me, and here in New Jersey, BYO is very liberal. You can do it almost anywhere. And you can do it in restaurants. We have restaurants, they're family-owned places that don't even have a liquor license. So if they're not selling anything at all, you can bring it free of charge. And those are the places where we usually go out. And there are several of them that have really great wine glasses, and there are some that have bad glasses like what you were just describing, and we don't go to those places. Or if we do, I don't bring a great wine. I bring a $15 or $20 bottle of wine, and we just, the food is good. You just toss it back, like simple Chianti or something like that. But to answer your question, I use two different types of glasses. And all the times I've been in Italy and tasting with winemakers, they've only used two different types of glasses too. So what Riedel makes, that I have Riedels, and I have think they're Spiegelau's, the other ones. So the Riedel shape I have is what they call their Cabernet or Bordeaux glass. And I use that for Cabernet and Bordeaux and all of my Italian wines, with the exception of Barolo and Barbaresco. So Barolo and Barbaresco, they have the Riedel recommends the Burgundy stem. So it's a little, wider at the bottom and tapers a little bit more at the top, because the Barolo and Barbaresco wines tend to be a little more delicate with their aromas. So this really tightens up the aromas at the top of the glass. And those are the only two glasses I've ever tasted with winemakers. The Piedmont winemakers will use the Burgundy stem, and everybody else uses a glass, similar in shape to a Cabernet stem.
Yeah.
All those other things. And I'm talking about even sparkling wines too. Champagne, Prosecco, from Valdobbiadene, they always use a regular glass, because the winemaker says there's nothing different about my wine. It's a white wine, just like in any other Chardonnay, except this one has bubbles. So you want to smell it, you want to taste it, you got to have a right glass. The flutes are great they're pretty for looking at, doing toasts and looking at the bubbles, rising up to the top, but it's not a practical glass for really enjoying wine.
Yeah, and a lot of people may not know that, but there's been a lot of people who have went through and done that exercise of tasting through the flutes have come to the same conclusion. It's probably the worst wine glass for champagne. I think my wife and I say
I don't even own flutes anymore.
We do, only because my wife says they're a mimosa glass. If you're going to make a mimosa, then you put it in that. It looks pretty.
Well, that's fair. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that.
So that's the only reason. But I did want to touch back on the my wife laughs at me or is embarrassed by me or however you want to describe it, because we've gotten to the point. I talked to another wine guy, a couple years ago, and he said on those places, those restaurants that are BYOB, that you don't like their glassware, he goes, bring your own. And so I've started doing that when we go to places that we really enjoy their food, but hate their stemware. I'll take a couple glasses and they'll offer me a glass, and I'll go, no, I've got my own, but thank you very much. And that seemed to be a good solution.
I've done that. I've absolutely done that.
Yeah.
Like you said, is a place where we, love the food, but, love the people, but they just don't have a nice glass, and, don't have to do that. I think the knowledge and the passion about wine is becoming more widespread. So you're finding these, a lot of restaurants around here. Most of them have pretty decent glasses.
Yeah.
And the two places where we go to, most of the time have excellent stemware.
That's great.
So yeah, it's great.
Well, let's dive into our topic today, which is is it Vino Nobile? How do you say it properly?
Yep, Vino Nobile di Montepulciano.
Di Montepulciano.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. And just so people are listening, Montepulciano is a place, but it's also a grape. So we want to be clear on this. This wine that we're talking about today is surrounded around the place. It's not made with that grape. So the grape that we're going to be talking about is Sangiovese again today.
Yep, and that's the one thing that I think, it's important to start the discussion with, so to translate the name, it's the noble wine of Montepulciano. Okay, so Montepulciano is a Tuscan hill town in Tuscany. It's almost, I'll say, due east of Montalcino, where Brunello is made. It's not far at all. So the two are they're kind of intrinsically linked together, but they're really different, and they're unique. They're both unique wines, and they're very different. So the confusion is like you mentioned, there's a grape, Montepulciano, spelled exactly the same way as the town is, but that grape is grown in southern Italy in Abruzzo, which is down by the heel of Italy's boot. So they couldn't be. They're totally not related, except for the name. And that's how we get into this discussion of Vino Nobile, because, the Vino Nobile, just like Brunello, just like Chianti, they have their own consortium of producers and a governing body. And they realized that, this was bad for our brand, because people, they don't know what it is that they're buying, and they don't want to be confused with Abruzzo. So I think it was 2 vintage years ago, the consorzio said, okay, you can now label your wine. You can label it Vino Nobile di Montepulciano. You can label it Vino Nobile, or you can just label it Nobile. And stripping away the Montepulciano name to rebrand it in a sense. And, as a follow up to today's, podcast, if anybody wants to go look, earlier this year, I did a series of articles on Vino Nobile. There's got to be maybe 40 or 50 reviews on Nobile wines. And, I lay all that out, as a reference. And when I was working on those pieces, I interviewed a lot of winemakers, and I thought it was interesting because I had always heard that they didn't like, the confusion. And when I got all these wines, they were all 2016. Some of them were maybe 2015s. Most of them were 2016s. Two great vintages. And most of the wines that I received were labeled Vino Nobile di Montepulciano. So I asked a couple of winemakers, I said, look, you guys, you went out of your way to address this whole thing. And all these wines I'm getting are labeled Vino Nobile Montepulciano. I said, what's going on? And it was interesting to me because, one of them said, this is, Montepulciano is where I live. It's where I grew up. This is my heritage. I'm making wine. I don't have, thankfully, any trouble selling my wine. I don't care about Abruzzo. This is my history. This is my tradition. And the name, means something. It's a sense of place and it's a link to that heritage. So I'm going to use the whole name, and I'm going to, work with people like me to bring it to the reader's attention as to why it's labeled what it's labeled and what it means. Because, Vino Nobile goes back to,
a long time.
The late 1700s, and I tell a story in the one article on my website how, Thomas Jefferson was instrumental in discovering Vino Nobile in Italy, and he loved it and brought it to the U.S. in massive quantities, just imported for his own, purposes. So he really was instrumental in bringing it over, centuries ago. So
but
it
does
have a long history and a long name.
It was curious to me, kind of reading about it, that you're right. I read in 1685 there was documents that were discovered that talked about this wine in this region, and that's when it was first kind of dubbed the wine of kings, is what the person back then had kind of described it as. And I thought that was very interesting because, fast forward, it never really got named with the noble part of it until much later in the early 1900s, and I thought that was very curious.
Right. And it's funny because, one of those winemakers said to me, how the American winery, the Marianis, went and they acquired what ultimately became Castello Bonfi in Montalcino. And, they had their biggest estate, and they really were instrumental in, exporting Brunello to the world. And one of the winemakers from Montepulciano said to me, if the Marianis had come to Montepulciano, everybody in the world would know what we are, and nobody would know what Brunello is.
Yeah.
So there's always a little rivalry there. But like I said, they're both great wines. They're both different for a few reasons, and and we can get into that.
Well, yeah, let's start diving into that, because people are going to hear that we're talking about the Sangiovese grape again. And, if they've listened to the previous episodes we've done, we've kind of stayed on that grape as we're going through Tuscany. That's kind of what we've been doing. But I know, climate and soils and, just winemaking process, aging, all of that plays a part in what that final expression in the bottle is going to be. So what are some of the differences?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. What are some of the differences here that kind of stand out to you that make this wine kind of, it's differentiated from the other ones that are made with Sangiovese?
Yeah. I mean, the key to me has always been, like I said, Montepulciano, they have that rivalry there. And for some reason, and I don't really know why, maybe it's just because they're close of their proximity. Everybody wants to kind of compare the two, but they really couldn't be any more different. To me, Nobile di Montepulciano is closer to Chianti Classico than it is to Brunello. And the reason I say that is in Nobile, you can blend grapes in the wine. Brunello by law must be 100% Sangiovese. Chianti Classico, no. Vino Nobile, no. You can blend. So the simple discipline for Vino Nobile is that it has to be at least a minimum of 70% Sangiovese, and the local name that they have that for there is called Pronolo Gentile, but you'll never see that on a label. So it has to be 70% Sangiovese. After that, it can be literally almost anything. It can be, you can add Cabernet, you can add Merlot, you can add, the indigenous grapes of Chianti, the Colorino, Canaiolo, Malvasia Nera, Syrah. You can add almost anything in there. Now, having said that, a lot of producers, want to express their Sangiovese in the best way possible. So a lot of the wines I tasted for my report that I referenced earlier, a lot of them were 100% Sangiovese. A lot of them were 90% Sangiovese if they weren't 100%. Maybe just with a little bit of Merlot in there, maybe a little Colorino. Colorino can be is a little bit darker. The juice is darker, so Colorino adds some color to Sangiovese. I think, marketing wise, frankly, I think people like it when they see a darker wine.
Yeah.
So they've got 90, 95%, Sangiovese, maybe 1 or 2% of Colorino, and a little splash of Merlot to round it out a little bit. So when you have a wine that's blended like that, I think they can be more approachable sooner than a single vineyard or a single grape wine. And in Vino Nobile, the laws don't require the wines to be aged as long, for example, as Brunello, before they can be released. So they only need 2 years of aging before they can be released, as long as 1 year is in oak. So, probably now, and then most producers would probably go a little bit longer than that anyway, because they want to make a better wine. But you can probably find, let me think,
And
1920. I would say you definitely will be able to find 2017s on the market. You might even start finding 2018s on the market. So if you contrast that with Brunello, the current vintage is 2016.
Yeah.
So Brunello takes 5 years to be released. So this is only a minimum of 2 years. And if they want to label a Reserva, it needs an additional year. But still, 1 year in oak, 2 years in bottle, or it could be 2 years in oak, 1 year in bottle, however the producer wants to work it.
Do you find that producers typically go a little longer than a year in oak? And my other question would be, do you find that for the Reserva that they definitely go a little longer in the oak?
Yes. Yeah. What happens is, again, when I went through these wines, most producers probably make at least 2 Vino Nobile. The first one will be, like the overall estate wine. So maybe that'll be, it might be blended, it might not be, but that'll be probably 2 years. 1 year in oak, 1 year in bottle, out to the market. Right.
Okay.
Then they'll probably make either if not a Reserva, they might just make a single vineyard from their estate that they think has more character to it. And so that they want to make into a more, cellar worthy, more substantial, complex wine. Maybe it's the best fruit from the estate. And that'll definitely be, those wines that I see are almost always 100% Sangiovese from the oldest vineyards that they can find. And also will be aged longer. And even if it's, it could be longer than 3 years. But most of the wines that I reviewed, honestly, I don't think they were labeled, as Reserva. That's the odd thing. They were, and I'm just looking through now, scrolling through one of my pieces. And what they do is, like I said, they have their base wine, and then they've made a cru or, a single vineyard, but they don't typically label them as Reserva. And, my articles covered, all of the huge producers, all the main players in that region. And that's typically the case of how they go about it.
Well, one reason I like talking about, obviously my wife and I, a few years ago, got into exploring Italian wines and quickly fell in love with Sangiovese. It's become, I mean, if you look at my old world cellar, it's predominantly, there's some French in there and some Spanish in there, but it's predominantly Italian. I've really fallen in love with this grape. But, when you first get into it, I think a lot of listeners, they go, well, I like Chianti, I like Brunello. When you explore the world of Italian wines, I think that's kind of where everybody directs you. If you're looking for Italian wines, it's going to be a Chianti, it's going to be a Brunello. For us shoppers here in the States is what I'm talking about. I mean, other parts of the world, I'm sure it might be different. But for us here in the States, I think when you can learn more about what's within that Tuscan region and what's offered and what's a great value for what you're getting in the bottle, I think doing this and having these conversations is really fantastic because it's opened me up to exploring some different regions and finding some really great wines. And I think we did a show on Montefalco and the wines of Umbria and things like that as well, which are some great wines. But I think Vino Nobile also falls into that category. I've had a few now in the last couple of months since you did your articles, and my wife and I are both going, okay, we would probably pay double for what they're charging us for this bottle of wine. It's that good. And I think, what are some wines that are some of your favorites? I know, it's obviously in your article, people can go there, but just to kind of give them an idea, what are some of your favorite producers and what are some that you see are distributed here in the United States pretty frequently?
Yeah. To get at what you were saying originally, with Sangiovese, I find it to be, I think the reason why it's so prevalent and again, why I gravitated toward Tuscany in the beginning is just because to me, it's the ultimate food wine. Bordeaux is great, but it's Cabernet. Napa, it's mostly Cabernet. I mean, how many things, I know a lot of people drink Cabernets maybe as cocktails, but it's when you're pairing with food, I don't know how much food you can really pair a Bordeaux or a Cabernet with. How often do you have a big steak or do you make lamb? The lamb is perfect for Bordeaux, but with Sangiovese, it's endless, right? Pasta, pizza, chicken, the heavier Brunellos, and that goes with your steaks just as well. Your Tuscan Fiorentina steak and your ossobucos and things like that. They're all for Sangiovese. So I think that's why I gravitate to it more than anything. But there are some classic producers. The two I think that are probably two of the largest. So they would have pretty good distribution in the United States. One is Poliziano, and the other is a Vignese. A Vignese is huge. And a Vignese has many different levels of Vino Nobile, and they also have several cru wines that they produce. And what's interesting about that is they vinify it the same way, they age them the same way, and they're all 100% Sangiovese. So the only difference you're getting is the dirt and the elevation of the vineyard. So those are obviously more micro productions and are a little bit harder to find. But if you want to really get a good handle on what Vino Nobile is, a Vignese is a good way to start. Poliziano is a good way to start. I love the wines from Boscarelli. And when I did my article, two of the properties that I thought were great, and one of them is imported, one of them is not, but the one that is not will happily ship direct from Italy. And the prices are reasonable for the shipping. So two places that jumped out on my radar from that tasting, one of them was called Tenuta Vallocaia, Vallocaia. They're in Italy, so they will ship. And the other one was a company called Monte Mercurio. Now, what was really nice about Monte Mercurio is it is imported. I think it costs about $20, and I rated it at 95 points. It was absolutely fabulous wine, a fabulous wine. And I'm speaking about the 2016. It happened to be a 2016. So it was really an eye-opening Vino Nobile for me, because both of those I had never had any experience with until I did that article.
And,
Um,
and what's the price point on those?
all the ones I mentioned.
Yeah, are they range it? I mean, you
Um,
don't have to say specifically, but you're kind of looking in what range?
yeah, I mean the Avignonese and Poliziano will easily be. I mean, depending where you are, I would say $20 to $25. Um, Poliziano makes a wine called Azinone, which is a single vineyard, and that wine is probably about $50. But that is comparable to Brunello. I mean, it's an
Okay.
absolute fabulous wine. Um, the Monte Mercurio is 20 bucks, which I just double checked on Wine Searcher. And then the Buscarelli is a little bit more expensive, but I really do enjoy their style. The Buscarelli is probably closer to 30. And then there's another one. A gentleman sent me his wines for these articles. It's called Contucci. And Contucci is one of the oldest families in Montepulciano, and their winery is literally on the main piazza of the town. Right next to the city hall. That's how long they've been there, and the cellars are underneath, right where they live, right in the piazza. And his wines, he sent me two. The one is the base wine. I absolutely loved it, and again, probably $20 to $25. And then he sent me his blue label wine. It's called Moulin Vecchio, the Old Mill, and that was really, really super special. And he sent me 2015s because he didn't have his 2016s yet, and they're both imported as well. Um, and coincidentally, I had another bottle of his wine, Contucci, just the other day, the tan label estate wine, and it just still, like, it hasn't changed since I started writing these articles. I'll see when were they published? Back in February of this year. So it's been about another 7 months since they've been sitting around in bottle, and it hasn't changed at all. Still absolutely outstanding and a great value.
Well, I think that's one thing as I kind of researched about Vino Nobile. They they make their wines not all the time, but a lot in a style that's approachable that you can drink it now and enjoy it now. But they also make some really good wines that can be aged for a while. I mean, this isn't just a region that's just approachable wines. They make some really good things that you can put in the cellar. And I always think back to what you say, John. There's that line of diminishing returns on putting wine in a cellar. Is it changing still, or is it just lasting? But I think speak to, do these wines continue to change? Do they have some aging to them that you can really enjoy down, buying 6-8 wines and drinking them over a period of time?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think, again, I'll go back to the cruise um, that these producers will craft, and I think they deliberately, build those wines with a lot more structure and a lot more oak aging, so that they can be put into your cellar, and you can enjoy the wine's evolution over 5 or 10 years, let's say. Certainly, I mentioned a Vignonese before. They have a couple different wines that could definitely do that. I mentioned Poliziano. They have a single vineyard called Le Cagiole. It's, again, probably $50 or $60, but that's a 10 to 15 year wine. You could easily put that in. And yeah, you said it's a fine line, but what I'm telling you is that you don't have any risk in my mind of putting these wines in the cellar. You're not gonna open them 10 years from now and say, "Wham, this thing completely died. I never should have
Okay.
held it." It'll be a little bit different, but these are built for the long haul. And there's plenty of other wines on the market that that can easily be enjoyed in their youth. And another one that I will mention, another producer that I'll mention, which is also fairly well distributed, is called Dei, DEI, it's spelled. Those wines are fairly widely available as well, I believe. And again, that's, probably $22, and then it'll go up. They make a single vineyard Reserva that's almost $60. Um, oh, and another one. It's funny, I have to mention it, but ironically, I don't see it a lot here. But everybody knows Antinori,
Oh,
if
sure.
you're talking about Tuscan wine, and he owns an estate in Montepulciano as well. So he has a Vino Nobile that I would imagine is fairly accessible, but I don't see it a lot here. Now, I think that's because he started when Antinori made their partnership with Chateau Saint Michel in Washington State. I think they changed their importation. Now their wines come into the West Coast. So some of the more, I'll say obscure wines like this one, I don't think it trickles over here so much. Um, but that I really enjoyed his wine too. And again, the estate wine was probably like $25. So, you're not going to ever find a $25 Brunello. And if you did, I would tell you probably not to buy it. Um,
Okay.
so yeah.
Okay, so here's a question for you, John. Uh, in Italy, do the Italians think that their region for drinking wine, is that what they drink and they kind of stay specific to where they are? Or do you find that they like to go out and explore what neighboring regions or even a whole different grape, Nebbiolo going up north and things? Do they drink throughout the country all the different wines? I've heard some people say they do and some people say no. If you live in this region, typically you just drink that wine in that region.
Right. That's a great question. I think it would depend on who you're speaking to.
Okay.
There's several articles on my website that are winemaker interviews. I have a section on the website just for them. And one of the questions I always like to ask, the winemakers is, I say, hey, Michele, you've been in the cellar for 12 hours, working, you finally go home and you have some dinner, what are you going to drink? What are you going to drink,
Yeah.
And he's like, sometimes it's just a cold beer, but, I'll say, what do you like to drink other than your own wine? And a lot of them do. A lot of them drink, a lot of them like Burgundy. A lot of them like the Barolos and Barbarescos. A lot of them will drink Brunello. Brunello producers tell me all the time, I like to drink my wine, but I also like to drink the Brunellos of, my fellow producers because I want to see, what they're up to. I want to gauge, how they handled the last difficult vintage. I want to see how their wine came out. Things like that. I think if you ask a local, what I'll say, a citizen, if you will, that's not a wine producer, I think you'll get two people. You'll get somebody like me that's going to buy wine all over the place. But again, I think it's very rare over in Europe, almost anywhere. I wouldn't imagine them buying, American wine. I think they buy French wine, Spanish wine, mostly Italian wine. And then if you drill down into a small village, um, let's say Castellina and Chianti. If you live in Castellina and Chianti, you're going to be drinking the wines from the producers that are in your town. You're going to go to your local. You can go to there. If you're really into wine, you can go right to the winery, buy whatever you want. You can go to your local, co-op grocery store, or there's a grocery store called Pam, the brand Pam. They have huge, wine selections in the grocery stores. People go and buy there. But then, there's also plenty of growers in Italy that simply grow grapes and don't have any interest in making the wine. So they just, they make the wine and they just bottle it in what they call sfuso, SFUSO, sfuso. And it's just basic table wine. You can go fill up a liter jug and just take it with you. No fanfare. Here's my wine. Here's my grapes. And it's as simple as that, and people make their own wine, you know.
Well,
So
those farmers that you're talking about, it makes me ask the question: do they farm with a purpose of selling to other winemakers, that do make wine? Do they have, because I always hear in Napa, and I'm kind of basing this question on knowing this, in Napa there's these farmers, and that's all they do is they have grapevines
Yep.
and they grow grapefruit, but they sell it by the ton to
Yep.
whatever.
Stagecoach.
Yeah, same thing
Right.
happens in Italy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially with the big producers, your Frescobaldis, your Antinori's, they will all, they have plenty of estate land that they sell, obviously, but they will also lease vineyards,
Yeah.
and they'll buy the fruit. Perfect example. That's why I think it's funny, in a land as old as Italy and a traditional, industry as wine goes back centuries. It always cracks me up when I find, this brand new producer, and I'm like, well, what,
Where'd you come
how
from?
could you guys have, this prime located vineyard and no one's ever heard of you, and now you're brand new? And it usually always is, well, we used to sell our grapes to so and so, and now we decided to start making our own wine. So, and that's typically how it happens. Or like with another example is Andrea Cecchi, the Cecchi family of estates. Excellent wines across the board from all different estates throughout Tuscany, and they just acquired an estate only 2 or 3 years ago, I think. It's called Villa Rosa. And I said to Andrea Cecchi, I'm like, where was this wine? Villa Rosa. I'm like, it's right up the street from your own, from your Villa Cerna that you've had for centuries. I'm like, what is going on with Villa Rosa? And now all of a sudden, you grab it. Same thing. The owner of that vineyard was just growing his grapes. He was selling to, Ruffino. He was selling to Antinori. And when he said, I'm done, I want to get out, my contracts with these guys are over. And Cecchi said, fine, I'll buy it. So they bought it, and now he owns it. So that happens all the time.
Okay. I wondered because, you always heard about old world, whether it's France or Italy, that the land had been in the families for so long. And so the perception to me, and I think most people, was that that's the land they made their wine from, just that land. But, obviously we know in the New World that's not the case. And I kind of thought that might be the case, but yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
Here's the reason I kind of brought up, do the Italians kind of explore other regions within Italy and same with the French and things like that? And I thought they kind of did, but the reason I asked that was it's hard for me, again, I enjoy Italian wine. And when I go to the wine store, and we have, Texas, Houston, big wine market, and we have some great wine stores that have just a fantastic selection. But looking for some of these wines from Italy, the Umbria wines and Vino Nobile from Montepulciano, I find some, but I don't find a lot. And I'm trying to understand, with the quality that they also have, why do you feel, is it just a distribution thing, or is it just a perception thing that, it needs to be, for Americans, it needs to be Chianti or Brunello, otherwise it just doesn't move that well off the shelf?
Yeah, for sure. You know what? I think it's probably a lot of all different reasons. Number one, I think here on the East Coast, for whether my perception is correct or not, and maybe Chicago factors in there too. I think that's where you have a concentration of a lot of Italian Americans, right? Coupled with the fact that New York and Newark are huge seaports, huge points of embarkation for bringing things in, especially from Europe. It's the shortest route. And that's where a lot of these more, I won't say obscure wines. It's just that they don't have the level of production. So it's harder to distribute them,
Okay.
nationally. But it's, one thing I've learned is that it's very strange, because having said all that, I'm here in New Jersey, and you would think that I could find any wine I wanted. And one of my readers on the website, he said to me, well, how come I've never seen you write up this Chianti Classico? And I said, well, I said, there are really good wines. I said, but strangely enough, I just don't see it around here. And, I happen not to know anybody at the importer who handles that wine. And I'm like, well, where, and I think he lived in Colorado. And I said to him, well, where were you getting it? And he's like, well, the first pint I ever saw it was at a gas station in Montana. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm like, how does that wine get itself to Montana and I don't see it here? And I know plenty of wine shops around the area, and I'll happily, work mail order from places in, Florida, New York, Connecticut, wherever. And I can drive into Manhattan and shop around, and you just don't see certain things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think, your Chianti Classico for sure, huge international brand. Brunello, huge international brand. Same thing with Barolo and to a lesser extent, Barbaresco.
Hmm.
But when you start getting into Dolcetto and even, Sagrantino, a lot of those people don't really know, what those things are. Um, and I've been with people when they've been making calls to retailers, and they would go up to the guy and they say, I got this Chianti Classico, you got to taste it. It's great. It's one of the best Chianti Classicos I've ever had. And the retailer says, I've already got 8 of them on my shelf. I don't need another one.
Yeah.
And it's that becomes a problem. And a lot of Americans, a lot of people that don't understand wine, they still think, Chianti is some kind of a grape. I've had people tell me all the time, oh, I don't like Chianti, but I love Sangiovese. I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, well, let me taste this with you then, and I'll show you. And it happens all the time. Oh, I don't like Sangiovese, but I really like Chianti Classic. I'm like, okay. So you never know. You never know.
Well, as we start to close out this episode, what what would be something you would say to the listeners to really get them to or to edge them to try to go find a Vino Nobile di Montepulciano? I mean, this is a region that, if you had to sum it up in a few words, that offers what? How would you describe it as far as different than what you might get in a Chianti Classico or something like that?
Right. I think what I would suggest is if you want to really get into a Vino Nobile, I would go out and, like I said, most of them are trending towards using a lot more Sangiovese. So I would just go out and try one. Maybe some of the producers that I mentioned. You can my website has the article there, parts 1, 2, and 3. They're all linked together. You can find the wines that sound interesting to you, and every one of the wines is linked to Wine Searcher. And that's another thing that I would suggest is to use Wine Searcher, because a lot of times you can put a wine in there and the name of the wine, and even here when I do it, a wine shop or liquor store will pop up someplace not too far from where I live, and I had no idea that the place even existed, and sure enough, they've got the wine there. So you never know what's going to pop up. Wine Searcher is a really, really good tool. But beyond that, I would say, look, go and taste. It gives you an authentic, representation of Sangiovese. Maybe if you can talk to somebody there who's in the store and say, I want to try this, but maybe I want something that has a tiny bit of Merlot in it. So kind of smooth it out for you in the first place. Somebody can steer you to trying one of those. But certainly, you're not gonna break the bank and be disappointed. And then I would just say, go for it. Have something, make the food simple, something that you enjoy, and see how the wine goes. Make your pasta with meatballs. Get a nice pizza. Just grill up some steak or something and see what you think, and then go from there.
Yeah. Well, John, thanks for coming on and doing this episode. Been a lot of fun to talk about Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, and just kind of getting the listeners to kind of understand and know another region that they can go out and explore. And I think everybody needs to go to your website. I think it's just a fantastic resource. And when you're kind of looking for a specific wine or from a specific region, you give so many, and I think at least a few of those they should be able to find no matter where they're at here in the States and around the globe for that matter. So definitely go to give the website again. John Fodera.
Sure. It's johnfodera.com, JOHNFODERA. The easiest way to do it is just to Google Tuscan Vines website, and it'll be the first thing that comes up.
And while you're there, there's a subscribe button, so you can get subscribed and get notified when you have new articles and that are coming out, and so people can get those right away, correct?
That's correct. And there's also the newsletter that they can subscribe to, which is, completely free. And what I do with that is I usually offer the content I put there is usually one of two things. It's either like something in advance. So if I've got a great wine and I want to tell my readers about it, I might put it in a newsletter for the people that subscribe. And I'm going to say, look, this is such and such wine. This is my review. This is where you can find it. Have at it, because I'm not going to put it on the website for 2 or 3 weeks. Or it's just exclusive content to them, something that will never go on my website. And it could be recipes, could be anything.
I also want to say that you do some really cool things with winemakers. I mean, you have some great relationships with Italian winemakers, and a lot of times through your site and through you, there's specials that they offer that if we go through you, we get some discounts, we get some deals. And these are some places in Italy that will ship to us, and we're getting into shipping season. So I wanted to mention that as well.
Yeah, actually, I'll thank you for that too, because it is true. Like, that's one thing I did, with the pandemic. It was very difficult for some of these small Italian wineries, when they weren't having, visitors or even locals allowed to come in and purchase directly from the estate. They really felt the pinch of that with their sales volume decreasing. And so I have talked to a lot of them, and we've done a couple of coupon codes, if you will, for my readers, where the estates either put together a certain package of wines, a couple different levels, if you will, a 6 bottle case, a 12 bottle case, and a couple different versions of each. And for my readers, they mention whatever the coupon code may have been. Sometimes it was my last name, sometimes it's Tuscan Vines, and they get free shipping, or they get 10% off, or they can just take advantage of that special deal, which already has the discounts built in. And yeah, the shipping, believe it or not, is really not crazy. Everybody thinks so from Italy, but I buy wine from California, and the shipping is 60, $70, whatever it might be for a case. And the last case I bought from Italy, I think it was maybe 40 or 50 euros. So that's like $60. And it comes here in 7 days to 10, 12 days, something like that. So I've written about all those deals in my newsletter for sure. And then, but the biggest one is a wine shop in Montalcino that I work with, right in Montalcino, where they sell almost any Brunello that you could think of. And I have an ongoing coupon code with them. It's just using my last name, and it's linked right at the top of the website. It's at the top of the website if you're on a computer. If you're on a handheld, iPad or something like that, you have to scroll down to see it. But 10% off just by using my name, Fodera, and there's no exceptions for sales. There's no limits. There's no expiration. Just 10% off. And as I start publishing my Brunello articles on the 2016 vintage, which the first part will come out this coming week, if you like those wines that I'm writing up, chances are you can get them from that place. And again, I've dealt, I don't have any, ownership or any interest in that place whatsoever. It's just a great store. And, I've bought cases of wine from them for years. So, they're flawless, they're trustworthy. The wines are, impeccable provenance, because they come, from a couple miles away and right to the center of town where they're sold. So, yeah, that was same thing for them. They were hurting for business. And that's how this came about. They said, hey, if you're going to write about Brunello, you can just tell them where to get, the wines, and we can give your readers 10% off to add value to you. So that's what I get out of it. And you get great wines that way.
Absolutely.
So keep your eyes peeled for that.
Yeah. I also follow you on Twitter, and I think following you on Twitter, if people are use Twitter, you definitely need to be followed, because again, you give us notice of when you're going to publish something to your blog, but you put things up on a more regular basis there, just because you're enjoying, through the week and through the weekend, what you're eating, what you're making, what you're drinking, and we kind of all get to interact with you that way. But other than Twitter, I know you're on Facebook, because I follow you there as well. Anywhere else on social media?
I have an Instagram page that I use often too. Probably not as frequently, obviously, as Twitter and Facebook. Um, my Twitter, following is the most substantial one probably. And I try to engage, as much as I can, with people that follow me there and ask questions and things like that. But sometimes what I will do, um, both on Facebook and on Twitter, is sometimes I might just review a wine. I might be, who knows what I'm drinking? It might be a Twitter only review, and I might do it in 2 tweets, and it's just, again, it's for the people that are following me, so that may never hit my website or it may never hit Facebook. So I try to add value, to whoever is following me where, any way I can.
Okay, that's very
to encourage
cool.
people to follow. Yep.
I didn't know you did that. I think that's very cool. It's a perk of following you on Twitter or Facebook or something like that. Very cool. So that means we got to go follow you on all these places so we don't miss anything.
Yeah. Until I don't know, until Instagram is completely absorbed by Facebook in some way. I don't know how, but if they ever combine them into one, who knows?
Well, now you have the ability to, if you post on Instagram, it automatically posts the same thing on your Facebook page.
Correct. Yeah. Which I don't do.
I don't either.
I usually do put it up on Twitter. I just don't want my Facebook page to be that cluttered. I have actually two Facebook. I have my own personal Facebook page, which really is all about wine. And then I have a Tuscan Vines page on Facebook as well. So the Tuscan Vines page is, straight, quote unquote business. You're going to go to there. You're going to find nothing but food, recipes, and wine. On my own page, it's pretty much the exact same thing, but I will throw up, the picture of a fire pit with the bourbon, and, I'll often, vent my frustrations with the Dallas Cowboys this time of year, sometimes over there, or the Navy midshipmen as that season has turned out to begin. But I don't clutter the Tuscan Vines page with any of that stuff. So,
well, John, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you doing the episode. Always enjoy having you on and having these conversations about wine, specifically Italian wines, man. I always learn something new, and I'm always ready when we're done to go out and find another bottle and have another glass. So thank you for that.
I am too. And tonight we're going to do just that with some football, some food, and some wine.
There you go.
A good Sunday.
Absolutely. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Food, Wine, and Whiskey in Your Own Backyard. And until our next episode, enjoy your next pour.